What's up, everybody? Mike here, coming to you with a brand new segment on the Fly Casual podcast channel called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where I, your benevolent host, will bring you my personal critiques of all things I find interesting in TV, film, music, and pop culture. On the docket for today, we have my personal critique of The Last Jedi. Fresh on the heels of the group's Last Jedi Retrospective, I go back and give my own thoughts on the film based on my January 19th, 2018 blog post on betterkind.com. Suit up and strap in. It's time once again to fly casual.
Let's get ready to wrinkle!
This review is rated spoilerific by Fly Casual Podcast. Virgin eyes and ears have been warned. Today, we look back at The Last Jedi. 1 year later, and everyone is still talking about this film. Love it or hate it, there is no denying the controversy that writer-director Rian Johnson has generated with this movie. After many, many discussions with the Fly Casual boys online and with friends and family near and far, my feelings about this movie have changed and crystallized over the last year. After producing the Last Jedi Retrospective episode for the podcast, I decided to go back and look at my own initial feelings about the movie. Although my ranking of where I place the film against other Star Wars movies has changed, I still feel generally the same about the positives and the negatives. Following is my review of The Last Jedi, dated January 19th, 2018, at the betterkind.com website, with some revisions and updates where noted. As of the posting of this video, The Last Jedi sits at $620 million at the domestic box office and $1.33 billion worldwide. A bona fide hit on the surface, although a closer look reveals some interesting facts. The Wall Street Journal reported on January 29th, 2018, that the movie fell about $200 million short of expectation. The movie also struggled at the Chinese box office, where some 90% of theaters dropped it after just 1 week in wide release. The movie has a critic score of 91% and an audience score of 45% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is a 46-point difference between critics and the audience, which is a little confusing. I've heard it suggested that the critic score is Disney's influence. Others are chalking up the low audience score to online hackers or disgruntled fanboys. I don't really buy that. The accusation is out there, but the website denies the rumors, and no one seems to be providing any proof. In my opinion, the score reflects the divisiveness this movie has produced among fans. I have friends that absolutely loved it and say it is the best movie in the franchise, and others that absolutely hate it. Interestingly, this is how The Last Jedi lines up against other movies in the franchise when comparing Rotten Tomatoes audience scores. Number 1, The Empire Strikes Back at 97%. Number 2, A New Hope, 96%. Number 3, Return of the Jedi, 94%. Number 4, The Force Awakens at 87%. Number 5, Rogue One at 86%. Now we take a bit of a dive. Revenge of the Sith at 65%. Number 7, Solo: A Star Wars Story at 64%. Number 8, The Phantom Menace at 59%. Number 9, Attack of the Clones at 56%. And number 10, The Last Jedi at 45%. Some people in my circles point at this and say this isn't possible. This has to be people screwing with the score. Again, though, without any credible evidence to the contrary, the score actually makes sense to me. So let's dig in and get into the nitty-gritty. Despite its flaws, there are actually a lot of things to like about this movie. The most outstanding part of the film is the cinematography. The movie is gorgeous to behold, from the beautiful lush green and blue landscapes of Ahch-To to the antiseptic whites and blood reds of Crate. The special effects are well done and keep with the aesthetic established by J.J. Abrams in The Force Awakens. through the mixture of practical and CGI effects. Even the over-the-top throne room of Snoke artfully catches the eye. I'm a sucker for contrast and artful themes. The soundtrack and the score is actually pretty amazing. Williams actually borrows heavily from his old catalog, which may account for this. The familiar was lacking in The Force Awakens and Rogue One. This was a pleasant surprise. Johnson's use of silence at key moments is also striking and very effective, most notably during Vice Admiral Hodo's sacrifice near the end of the movie. Think what you want about how Johnson handles Luke in the film. There are many critiques, for sure, but Mark Hamill, despite his own reservations about the direction of the character, nails his performance. A true professional, Hamill lost himself in the role and gave one of the best performances of his career. Carrie Fisher was also a highlight in her final performance on the silver screen. She was less stiff than in The Force Awakens. I felt more drawn to Leia's character in this film. She embodied all the things we love about Leia. The strong-willed rebel leader, her face now brushed with the wisdom and age of experience. She was stoic and memorable. The knowing silence on her face when Kylo was leading the attack on her ship was a perfect moment for her. And choice of wardrobe this time around, much more fitting in my opinion with her more regal outfits. In terms of favorite scenes and arcs, there are many. The aforementioned Holdo sacrifice jumps to the front. Most of us in our group that saw the movie together thought she was throwing herself into the line of fire to save the group. Online fans are calling it the Holdo maneuver. Some have gone over the top with analysis, though, pointing out that if this was a thing, the rebels should have been using it the whole time. In fact, there's a meme being routed that showed a scene of Rogue One where a Mon Cal suggests the maneuver and they destroy the Death Star at Scarif at the end. Despite the brilliance of the meme, I say enjoy it for what it is. Surprise that looked hella cool on the big screen. Most people challenge me on this one, but I did like the Leia floating in space scene. For me, it was less about the way it looked, described by most as a Mary Poppins in space kind of thing, and more about the fact that this was the one and only time I will be able to see Leia use the Force in a physical way on screen, given the filmmakers' penchant for killing off old characters and the fact that Carrie Fisher has passed. In terms of new characters, Rey and Kylo steal the show again. The dynamic of them bonding through the Force and communicating unbeknownst to Luke was a brilliant way to develop their characters. The movie left me wanting more of them and to know more about their path. Both Ridley and Driver are brilliant in their roles. The throne room team-up, even if prematurely cut short in my opinion, will be one of the most memorable scenes in the saga. I felt real character development from The Force Awakens to Last Jedi. Their story is what will bring me back for 9. I am hopeful that JJ can reel things back in from the oddities of The Last Jedi and give us a conclusion to this trilogy that these characters deserve. Well, unfortunately for me and many fans who share the same criticisms of this film, The Last Jedi is not without its flaws. Let's rip off the Band-Aid together and get this one done, shall we? By far, for me, the biggest issue of this film has to be the use of over-the-top humor. I mean, it was bad. It was worse than bad. There was humor in this film that would have been played better in a Farrelly Brothers movie, and that's not an exaggeration. Seriously, Finn's big entrance walking out of the medical bay, which happens to be right next to the Starfighter landing bay, no less, in a daze and leaking fluid from his plastic suit is like Harry pulling Lloyd's catheter out in Dumb and Dumber 2. I mean, come on. We also get a taste of things like space crank calls starring Poe and Hux, Porg hub levels of on-screen porging, Luke and Rey foreplay using force tickling and feathers, Attack the Clones level humor from Leia telling 3PO to wipe that look off his face, General Hux quipping one-liners at the guy who could kill him with a thought. Do you think you got him? There's more. Unfortunately, a lot more, but I'm trying to block it out. Seriously, had Johnson admitted to himself and Kennedy and Lucasfilm had enough wherewithal to understand that Johnson isn't a comedic writer. These atrocities could have been prevented. In fact, it is the humor that kept me from giving this a higher score and setting it closer to The Force Awakens on my list. In my mind, this movie was going to be a more serious film, perhaps a little darker than the others, but not devoid of well-conceived humor, a la Empire Strikes Back or Rogue One. I couldn't have been more wrong. Ryan, you cannot write humor. Learn this. And for God's sake, if they let you keep this new trilogy, please, oh please, bring in some help. Seriously. Let's rewind for a moment to 2014. Disney has just purchased Lucasfilm, and there is talk that Star Wars is throwing out their old canon. In its place, we are promised a shiny new canon where continuity matters. We are told that there are people at Lucasfilm that are hired specifically to be in charge of continuity between the movies, novels, comics, games, all of it. We are going to get the Marvel Cinematic Universe treatment. Since The Force Awakens, however, I've come to the slow realization that there is actually no one at Lucasfilm, save one Dave Filoni, that actually gives a damn about continuity. This was never more clear to me than when I got out of my first viewing of The Last Jedi. Literally half of Rian Johnson's movie was undoing what JJ had done. All those rumors early on that Lucasfilm was hosting regular meetings with Johnson and JJ, presumably to meld their visions and create a cohesive story, were complete and utter bullshit. Remember Anakin's lightsaber that caused Rey's Force vision in The Force Awakens and its draw to her in the confrontation with Kylo Ren in the forest? Well, Johnson had Luke throw it on the ground, and Johnson ends up destroying the lightsaber at the end of the movie. We're killing off all the old characters. We might as well break the lightsaber too and give it no meaning to the story. Which leads to unanswered questions and overarching plot missteps. The Force Awakens was significant in that it was the start of a brand new trilogy and we had no idea where it was going. So, like a first movie should, it presented the audience with a lot of interesting questions. For every question posed by J.J. Johnson had or should have had an answer. J.J. question: what is the significance of Anakin's lightsaber? Johnson's answer: nothing. In fact, less than nothing. And I'm going to break it so we don't have to see it anymore and remind ourselves of old characters. Old characters are stupid. I want people to pay attention to what I'm doing. JJ question: who are Rey's parents? Why was she left on Jakku with Unkar Plutt, as we see them presumably fly away in a shuttle in Rey's Force dream? Johnson's answer: you didn't really see them fly away. That was just a dumb Force dream. Rey's parents are paupers on Jakku that sold her for booze money. JJ's question: who is Snoke? Is he Sith? If not, what is he? How did he find Ben Solo and convert him to Kylo Ren? Johnson's answer: Snoke doesn't matter. Let's just kill him without any exposition. JJ's question: what is the origin of Kylo's helmet? It looks a lot like a fan favorite Darth Revan. Johnson's answer: that hat is dumb. He doesn't need it. In fact, that stupid scar that JJ put on his face, let's move that for no good reason too. Yeah, that's better. Just the way I want it. That dumb JJ is dumb. They should just give me a whole trilogy and let me show them how it's done. The plot holes were also glaring. Canto Bight made no sense, and the mission was ultimately a failure. Literally, its only purpose was to give Finn something to do in the movie and give Johnson a chance to make unsophisticated political statements about hating the rich and loving animals or something. The only bright spot being Benicio del Toro's performance, who did an outstanding job with what he was given. Meanwhile, back with the Resistance in their slow-speed chase through space, Vice Admiral Holdo and Leia decide not to tell Poe that they're heading to Crate. Letting him in on the secret would have quelled a mutiny. It made no logical sense why they needed to keep that from him. The love story between Finn and Rose was poorly conceived and underdeveloped. Rose preventing Finn from sacrificing himself to save the Resistance killed what would have been one of the best moments in the trilogy. And probably the worst offender, the Kylo-Rey team-up that lasted just long enough to kill Snoke and his guards. Johnson worked up this really cool moment where Rey and Kylo could have ended the movie and walked off together and left this giant cliffhanger for Episode 9. Instead, he ended the movie like the team-up didn't even matter. Finally, One of the criticisms I've heard from fans of the movie regarding those who did not care for it is that fanboys thought The Force Awakens was too much like the original trilogy and The Last Jedi was not enough like it. I find this critique hilarious. The Last Jedi was almost a mirror image of The Empire Strikes Back, complete with walkers on a white planet striking at a rebel base, Jedi training at a faraway planet, a kooky old Jedi Master, Force ghosts, Resistance escaping the First Order on a slow-speed chase through real space because of the inability to use the hyperdrive. This was every bit a copy of the original movie, just like The Force Awakens. For the ugly, I usually save the one most egregious part of a film to discuss. In the case of The Last Jedi, however, there is a trifecta of ugly. First, Johnson's treatment of Luke Skywalker is simply put, unacceptable. The character is one of the most iconic in cinematic history. I have heard it argued, and I agree, that there are certain iconic characters that transcend and are eternal and don't change. James Bond, for example, is eternal and does not change. Audiences come to expect certain things from icons. You take a huge risk when you mess with that formula, for example, brooding Superman in the Man of Steel movie. Luke, when faced with the opportunity to strike down his own father in Return of the Jedi and join the Emperor as the second most powerful man in the universe, looked at Palpatine in bold defiance, knowing that this would lead to his own death, and said, "Never. You have failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi like my father before me." Johnson has reduced this icon to a suicidal old kook who thinks about killing his sister's son and runs away to hide from his problems. Really? He can't bring himself to kill his own father, who has been the arbiter of death in the galaxy, but ignites his lightsaber against his sleeping nephew, who he thinks is turning into the big bad baddie? Swing and a miss. I truly understand what Johnson was going for here. Luke is old now. How often does a filmmaker have the opportunity to think about and write the ending to such a beloved character? What he failed to realize is that difference between a character and an icon. In my opinion, Luke deserved his moment to shine and a more plausible treatment. We should have gotten real Luke meeting real Leia on screen. I can even accept Luke making the ultimate sacrifice in this film, though I do wholeheartedly reject that you have to kill off all the old characters to be able to move the story forward for the benefit of the new. Even Hamill felt all this in his bones when he first read the script and confronted Johnson about it. By the way, Mark Hamill needs to stop apologizing for sharing these feelings. Second, Rian Johnson was a colossal misstep. I'm probably the most disappointed by him because I was such an ardent supporter leading up to this movie. I really thought he was going to be the one to take this story and launch it into the new era. Instead, I feel like I got a whiny brat who wanted to undo everything that JJ did in his movies so he could put his own stamp on things. I understand the desire to make a story and a film your own, but Star Wars is not a franchise you can do that with. At least not with the saga films. Johnson would have been better served if he had done an anthology and took some classes on writing humor, or better yet, brought in a writing partner that has that talent. If there is one thing that we can take away from the original trilogy, it's that collaboration is key. 3 different directors under the guidance of caretaker George Lucas. Those movies felt cohesive. I thought Kathleen Kennedy was going to be the one to pick up that mantle, but The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi tell me that she either doesn't care about a unified vision or she is extremely overworked with all the projects they're producing at breakneck speed. I tend to believe the former. At the end of the day, Rian Johnson was not very creative or inspired, and that is really just the most disappointing part of the film to me. I expected way more. Third, fan reactions have been tough to swallow, on both sides. A lot of people didn't like this film and have legitimate concerns with it. There has been this movement on the part of some superfans to quell the dissent. Perhaps I'm more sensitive to it being on this side of the debate. I'll just end this part of the discussion by saying that you are allowed to love this movie, you're allowed to like this movie, and you're also allowed to despise this movie. At the end of the day, it's just a damn movie. Folks need to take it down a notch. My 10-year-old daughter had a more insightful comment than most of the opinions I read about this movie. As we walked out of the theater, the very first thing that she said to me was, "Dad, I don't like the people that made this movie. They keep killing all the characters that I love." From the mouths of babes. At the end of the day, this just isn't a good movie in any way you slice it. Give the movie 2 out of 5 stars. Would have been lower except for the great cinematography and score. This is a first for me when it comes to Star Wars movies, but I quite simply don't like it. It misses too many marks that should have been easy to hit. The Last Jedi has made a lot of money at the box office, but so did The Phantom Menace when it hit theaters. So in the long term, the real question we have to ask ourselves is this: will the divisiveness of this movie affect future efforts? Some say it already has, with Lucasfilm's first official flop in Solo: A Star Wars Story, not to mention Bob Iger's announcement of a slowdown. J.J. Abrams has his work cut out for him. I don't envy him at all. But if there is anyone out there that can pull the sequel trilogy out of the muck and salvage it, J.J. probably has the best shot. After all, these are his characters and the initial story treatment was his. We'll just have to wait and see. Initially, I put The Last Jedi in the middle of the pack of the list of movies. But as time goes on and the flaws of the movie become more and more unforgivable in my mind, I've placed the film at the bottom of my list. In fact, it's a distant last, nowhere close to the others, so divorced from everything that came before it that I have come to view the movies now as George Lucas's films and everything else, which are nice little Star Wars-y tales that exist in an alternate universe. The fact that The Last Jedi was so divorced from everything before it and undid everything J.J. set up in his film, The Force Awakens has also dropped on my list. The lack of a unified vision for this trilogy is distracting and unforgivable in my opinion. Apologists have been stating that the original trilogy was also pieced together and there was no unified vision for it, to which I call bullshit. Lucas may not have known exactly where he was going with 5 and 6, but nearly all the story elements existed in early drafts of the first film, and the big story arcs came from a single source. It is shocking to me that Kathleen Kennedy allowed each individual filmmaker to make an independent movie with no story limits other than using the same characters. How in the world did anyone at the top of the ladder think this was a good idea? I have said this before and I'll say it again. I really don't blame Rian Johnson for making this film. He ultimately made the movie he was told he could make. This all lands squarely at the top of that ladder. Anyway, my Star Wars order of my favorite movies: number 1, The Empire Strikes Back; number 2, A New Hope; number 3, Rogue One; number 4, Return of the Jedi; number 5, Revenge of the Sith; number 6, Solo: A Star Wars Story; number 7, The Phantom Menace; number 8, The Force Awakens; number 9, Attack of the Clones; and number 10, The Last Jedi. 2 out of 5 stars. I want so bad to like this movie, but every time I even think about watching it again, it makes my skin crawl. Being the completist fan that I am, I of course purchased the film on Blu-ray. When I got it home, I popped it in for my 3rd official viewing. I had to stop about 5 minutes in. I couldn't get past a post-crank phone call. It's got to get better from here, right? Anyway, thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe and rate us at iTunes, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast locations. It is important that you rate us so that we can reach more and more people. As always, be sure to check out the show notes at betterkind.com. There are also many, many ways to join the conversation. Follow us on Twitter at FlyCasual1138. Like us at Facebook, facebook.com/FlyCasualPodcast. We are also now on YouTube, so please take a moment to subscribe and ring the bell for updates. We are also now on Discord as well. Lots of opportunities to chime in, reach out and say hi. Talk to you soon.